Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. This is James. With me in this episode is Lacey.
Hey.
You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix. If you like us, you can support us at Patreon, and you can give us a rating and review at iTunes or wherever you find us at. In this episode, we're going to talk about making better player characters to improve your fantasy gaming. And now, it's time to get our gaming fix.
I'm Chris from All Things Good and Nerdy, a proud member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual hosts. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready, because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to that episode of Just More Fix. Couple quick announcements before we get things rolling today. First off, we have scheduled our January Indie RPG Day, and it is on Sunday the 27th, and from 2 to 6, and that's at Game in Terre Haute on South 7th, so hope to see you guys there. If you are interested in coming this month, I am running Troubadours. Well, not running, I guess playtesting Troubadours, and hopefully we'll have a good time with that. And do you know what you're running, Lacey?
It's a surprise.
Okay, very good.
For everybody.
Including yourself. Right on. Speaking of Troubadours, on the Patreon now, if you guys are a Patreon supporter, I have uploaded all of our play materials as they are right now for Troubadours. And there may be some changes and some corrections coming to those as we play test and things get moved around or changed, or wording changes or rules change or new moves added or taken away, whatever. But they are up there now. So if you are a Patreon supporter like Simon, Alan, or the OG Todd, you can check those out there. Third announcement for those of you that are headed to Gen Con this year, or just a quick reminder that badge registration opens up on Sunday the 13th, and that's at Eastern Time at noon. And the dreaded hotel registration is on the 27th at noon as well. So get registered and get your Gen Con badges, and we hope to see you guys there. And hopefully you guys do well in the hotel registration. Yeah, we'll just leave it at that, I suppose. Right on. All right, so today you heard we're going to talk about improving your fantasy gaming, but by making better player characters. So we're going to kind of run through some things about making characters and making specifically whether that's advice to give your players when they make their characters, or ways that you can make better characters on your own as you make them. But this one, we're going to kind of just bounce some ideas around and kind of see where things go, because there's already a ton of advice out there about how to make better characters and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to kind of just talk through a couple ideas that we had during the pre-show and see where things kind of go from there. So before we get into the actual nitty-gritty about making better characters, so one of the things that we always see people talk, or you hear people talk about, or you see posted online when people critique games, is they sort of poo-poo all over the GM and what the GM did wrong and what they could have done better and how things could have been better in a lot of different ways, right? But most of that is pushed back at the GM for why the game went wrong, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just sort of what you generally see, is it's the focus is put towards the GM. But role-playing and tabletop gaming is a collaborative experience around the table. So I don't think that that's entirely a valid criticism, and in some cases maybe it is entirely the GM's fault. I'm sure there are those one-offs where it was just either a bad day or whatever happened, and it is 100% the GM's fault. I would say that that's probably the exception and not the rule on the 100% side, right? So there's a whole group of people around the table, so why is it always one person's fault? Like, why is it always sold that way? Do you know what I'm saying? So I think that part of the process of having bad games is also owning the fact that maybe you made a character, or maybe the group of you made characters that weren't the most cohesive or most conducive to playing an adventure.
Well, I see like there's this divide, right, between your people that are like your old school gamers, and they're like, yeah, you know, the angry GM versus players, right? And
right.
So there's like,
oh, like adversarial GMs.
Yeah, there's like that side. And then the other side is like, oh, well, the players are actually the most important. Well, if you didn't have a GM, you would all just be sitting at home watching Netflix. So no, you're not the most important. Like,
right.
Neither one I feel like is good. And I find both sides to be terribly annoying and inaccurate. So,
well, I think you're like most things. The solution is probably somewhere actually in the middle. It's never entirely the GM's fault, and it's probably never entirely the player's fault. But I think in most cases, the GM probably feels like they are responsible for the failure because they're the one that does the prep and all that kind of stuff.
I'm always going to sympathize with the GM more because they did all the work to get you here.
I agree with that very much. So I guess the first part of this is to say, if you're having a bad experience at the table, not because of personal issues or crappy players,
then stand up, flip the table, walk out of the room.
Yeah,
make sure your dice are collected first.
Right. And then go. But I think also take ownership in the fact that maybe you made a character that wasn't either, I don't know what the right words are, but like
appropriate to the setting and plot.
Well, that, or maybe you have a character that was appropriate to the setting and plot, but you didn't flush it out maybe as well as you could have. Maybe you didn't give hooks for your game master to sink into to sort of pull you along in whatever their plan was for what they had planned out, right?
Yeah.
So,
and like most things, like a lot of those problems can be solved with conversation.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. But I think that if you build those things in initially, then you can do a lot of things to make your character give the game a chance to shine, right?
So I'm going to give you a standard scenario for character creation. It goes something like this. We sit down. We're going to play a fantasy game. I already know before I get there that I want to play an elf. Why do I want to play an elf? Because I think they're cool. I love elf culture. No, because they're immune to sleep and I get extra points for things that other people don't. That's obviously the reason. Or I want to play a human so I can have those extra skill points in multi-class or whatever.
Right.
So it has absolutely nothing to do with anything other than I think elves are pretty sweet and I like pointy ears. Like there's no other thought going into this. Maybe that's not you. However, I'm just breaking it down. The next thing that happens, I roll a boatload of dice. Sometimes I might decide beforehand what class I think I would like to play.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I look and see what my stats are and I think, well, that's probably not going to make the best cleric, so I'm going to be a fighter instead. Mm-hmm. Because my story doesn't really matter, my character doesn't matter, the dots on the paper matter. That's what's going on. The next thing I go through, maybe I'm playing a game with like feats or whatever. Maybe I'm not. Anyways, but classic, a lot of your adventure-style fantasy games involve some kind of skill allocation. The next thing I do is look and see if it's an attribute plus skill system, what's going to give me the biggest bonus and make me the most successful on rolls. Mm-hmm. Am I thinking about why I should be good at this thing? No, not at all. I'm just thinking about, is this going to help me live later on? That's it. There's no other forethought. And then we sit down and play, and the GM's like, cool, how do you guys know each other? And there's like crickets in the room. And then the GM might ask you, if they're a good GM, they might ask you things like, where are you from? Do you have any family? To which case your answer is inevitably going to be I'm from nowhere or everywhere, and I love no one and hold nothing dear.
Right.
And then the game starts. So that's my breakdown of the average character prep session. Mm-hmm. That's done poorly. So I think that's probably a good place for us to start.
Okay, so first off, I'm just going to say, I've always felt as a game master and a player that the first session of a game, the artificial trope that exists that you are all in an inn and now you're going to meet and blah, 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 is just the most nonsensical thing in the world, right? When you put in a video game to play and it just comes out and it's a cinematic scene and it tells you this is what's happening, you don't throw it out the window because this game told you what you were going to be doing, right? Mm-hmm. So why do we have this? When I say me, I mean the royal we, right? Like some people out there have this problem with saying, no, I want to be able to just go do whatever. I don't want to set up any backstory. It just seems totally artificial to me because when you go watch a movie, which I will admit is a different experience than playing an RPG, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you play an open-ended sort of video game, you don't have any problem with the game setting some parameters around where is the story starting, right? So because I think it's entirely a waste of time to play out the tavern scene where it's like, oh, there's an elf. They look like they might be friendly to me. I suppose I'll go chat with them. It's completely artificial and just nonsense, and it's a waste of time, in my opinion. I think that you could spend that same amount of time you do running that scene to just work out sort of at a meta level. Why do we know each other? Have we been on adventures together? Where's our background? You know, like all these kind of simple, easy questions that you're...
Well, there's an important thing GM-wise in how you ask the question, too. So not like, do you know each other? Like, how do you, Ron, know Jenny over here?
Right.
Not like, do you? How do you? You know, is there any tension in this relationship? And then you ask Paul over here, okay, Paul, what was your last adventure? Where are you coming from right now? You know, and then you can kind of get people to sort of think about how they know each other and how that's going on.
And this comes back on the players as well, because what you're talking about is from the GM side of things, right? But what if your GM doesn't do that?
And from a player, I don't want to hear just, yes.
Well, no.
Do you know each other? Yes.
What I'm saying, though, is maybe your GM doesn't have those question prompts that they ask, right? You're just at a table making a character. But you could look at the player next to you and say, hey, how do our characters know each other? What was our last adventure we just went on, right? Because even if you're a first level character, well, you're still first level, but you had to have something happen to you to go from 0 level to first level or whatever, to go from grubby peasant to, to aspiring adventurer or whatever it is that you are, right? So...
Well, and a short personal backstory, too. And one that you share with everyone else, because your short personal backstory does absolutely nothing for anybody if you don't tell anybody.
Well, yeah, and secrets at the table is kind of a funny thing, too. And I guess it depends on if your table is sort of one of those where the players are trying to get over on one another. But if you're at a friendly...
With secrets at the table, too, because even if it's not trying to get over on one another, there's those secrets that can lead to potential danger and complications for the ententire party later. So it's not necessarily like you're trying to get them in trouble, but there's something else in your
there's a
past
fine line, though, where you're keeping... Because chances are your secrets are probably never going to come out unless you try to make them come out, right?
Right.
And... the more you hide that stuff, the less relevant it is. And it's not fun you're not adding anything to the game. No one hears the game that's played inside your mind, you know?
Yeah, it's like the old flaw, like, some of the flaws from Vampire. Like, I'm going to take this. I have an allergy to rice. Like,
it's never going to come up.
That's going to be relevant later.
Absolutely.
What?
Absolutely.
You don't even eat food anymore. Unless you eat that one guy that had a lot of sushi.
So I know most people out there are playing a D&D or Pathfinder style fantasy game, right? So they may not have experienced a lot of the other smaller fantasy games that are out there. So I thought we might just run through a couple things real quick that make certain systems really shine at what they do and how you might be able to incorporate that into your fantasy gaming.
Okay.
At a D&D or Pathfinder level, right? Or even an OSR level. So we talked about character creation a little bit already and sort of asking questions about how you're connected. Well,
and this is like at our table, we have a couple of terms that we use, right? One is the murder hobo, which is what I talked about. Like, I'm from nowhere. I love no one.
Right.
I hold nothing dear. And then there's, we're here to stab the bags of treasure and get the experience.
Yeah, right. So Fate, most people have heard of. It's super, super popular. But when you make characters in Fate, there's this this phase trio you go through, right? So the first part is you make a high concept for your character. So it's sort of like the defining sentence of what your character is, right? And then you make a trouble, which is the thing that gets you in trouble. The thing about your character that always gets you and sets you into motion and gets you into trouble. Both of those two things, I think, can be incorporated into any game and don't have to have any mechanical effects whatsoever, but add a lot to your character and your personality. And it gives you it gives the GM a reason to dangle something in front of you to say, whatever, maybe your trouble is, I can't back down if someone calls me chicken, right? Like Marty McFly style, right? Did you call me chicken? One of those moments. And the GM knows it, and it's a button for the GM to push, right? And you're sort of giving the GM the keys to the car of your character to say, hey, this is how you engage me in the story. If there's something you really need us to do, this is, one way to do that. Or something has happened and you need to complicate things or turn up the tension. This is how you do that, right? And it doesn't even have to have any kind of mechanical effect whatsoever to change the game. So if you're worried about hacking rules or whatever, you can add this to that. Just have a high concept and trouble, and doesn't change anything mechanically, but it adds story to the game, right? After you have those two things, then you start to make aspects about each other. So what was our first adventure? How did I meet you? And you write things out and little blurbs and scenes about how the characters are connected together.
They're core components of your character as an individual that are created out of experiences with the other people at the table.
So, and Fate is a little loosey-goosey, right? But if you're in a D&D style game, I think it's fair that if the game master is going to use this as a mechanism to say, whatever your adventures are fine, but they have to be within reason of what your scope of power is right now. So if you're making 10th level characters, then it's fine to say that we killed this black dragon or whatever. If you're guy making characters that just came out of the turnip field, perhaps that's not the case, right?
Plus the aspect you're getting out of it is that you're a pathological liar.
Right. So, but those are, and then everyone goes around the table doing it, and it sort of connects your characters together in an interesting way. And more importantly, it makes everyone's relationship slightly different. So maybe I rescued Lacey's character and I had a huge argument that nearly came to physical blows with Lee's character. And then Carrie's character is this person who I just really don't even care about, but she's always there. And then each of them will have three different style of opinions and connections to everyone else's character. And it starts to create this web that makes the relationships more interesting. When you watch Lord of the Rings, the stories about the relationships between the characters and all the trials that they go through and how they disagree and why they disagree about what they should do with the ring and who should carry it and all this kind of stuff, right? That can all be set up with this phase trio very easily. And it doesn't even have to change anything mechanically.
And you see this like in a super simplistic way with like Powered by the Apocalypse too, when it comes to like strings and things like that.
History and stuff.
The thing I like about that a little better than the Fate is that the relationship can be positive or negative, and it can change. Like the same event could have a different feeling for each character, which I think is cool. And in a much more complicated degree, you see the same concept with Trail of Cthulhu and with the new Vampire V5. So those aren't fantasy games, but you can definitely take good things from those about the character creation that you can pull over into fantasy gaming.
Well, you mentioned Powered by the Apocalypse, and one of the things about every PBTA game is that there's a playbook, right? And generally speaking, all of the PBTA games have, with the exception of a few of them, every playbook is very much its own thing. In a way, it's a class, right? So when you sit down to play a game, if you're not planning to play the game that is all wizards or all fighters or something, right? Well, your class is sort of the thing that makes you special, right? In those fantasy games. And unless you have a good reason to have like 2 clerics or 3 clerics in the party or 2 wizards or whatever it is, then don't do that. Choose something else, right? That's what makes PBTA kind of interesting, is that you're never going to have 2 hard holders in one game. You're never going to have 2 skinners. You're never going to have 2 cutters or whatever. Once you take that playbook out of the mix, it's out of the mix, right? And it gives you a chance to be special. Now, disagree with me if you want.
I don't entirely agree with you, because I've had a lot of fun being like, okay, you guys are, like we did the game where everybody had to be a dwarf.
Right.
In the game I'm running for you guys, you're all 3 female witches. Are you different? Yeah, for sure.
Right.
And your backstories are different, and your
well, we're all the same class.
You're
but
all
we're
a very different archetype of person.
Yeah, and then even within the class, we have different abilities within the class or whatever.
But you're all the same race.
Right.
You're all the same class. You're all the same gender.
Right. Well, that's where I would kind of go back to what I was trying to say before, was unless you specifically set out the game to be that way, right? If that's a conceit of the game that we're all dwarves, we're all elves, we're all wizards, or whatever it is, then let everyone have their individual thing to shine at, because what that also, it gives you, it lets you give them a chance to shine, but it also gives you a chance to shine, right? Because you have your own thing. Because no one wants to be the guy that follows around the dude that can do everything.
Do you think some of it depends on setting too? Like, I feel like in real life, like if LA was an adventure world, there'd be a lot of bards there, and like not as many warriors. But like if you went to like
maybe I suppose
Montana or Texas or something, it'd be like there's a lot of fighters here.
Right. So there are some, like in LOTFP, right? There's a lot of, the majority of people would either be fighter or specialist, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's okay to have that. It's just when you have those moments where if you're a fighter and I'm a fighter, then we have to work harder to make sure that we are not the same. There are very definite things to draw differences between the two of us, whether that's styles of combat and how you go about attacking versus me, whether it's ranged or melee, or whether you're all about big weapons and big damage and I'm more about precision. However that is, I think it's important to draw those distinctions because that's what, sometimes you need the guy that can just deal crazy damage. Sometimes you need the guy who's all about precision and range stuff maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are areas where you can definitely overlap and it can still be interesting, but it makes it, you have to do a little bit of extra work, right? To be able to draw a distinct difference between your two characters.
Right.
So, right on. Well, along those same lines, or no, not along those same lines at all.
The opposite of that.
Right. So just like in Fate, how you have this phase trio thing where it allows you to sort of connect your characters together, Burning Wheel has one of the most interesting ways to make your character more interesting sort of on an internal level, right?
Oh, I forgot completely about the backgrounds that inform your
so
skill set.
Those are life paths, but I was actually going to go a different way. I was going to go with beliefs and instincts, right? So these are core things that your character has. So a belief might be
all dwarves are fundamentally good. That's a belief.
That's true. In that case, it's something that your character has. It's like part of their ethos, right? It's all dwarves are fundamentally good, or you could have all elves or whatever it is. You could have, I will avenge my, the murder of my parents, or it's generally related to things
I will destroy the ring of power.
Right. Large aspirational things, like big idea stuff. Because there's no alignment in Burning Wheel, but it's kind of a way to draw your characters, well, their personal beliefs, but also their sort of ethics into it, right? Things that you believe at a fundamental level. And then they have instincts, which are actually, I think, way easier to make because their examples, they say to always use the words I will always or I will never. So always draw your sword at the first sign of danger. Never take the last blow. Always tell the truth, whatever it is, right? So these are things that are very personal to your character, right? And they sort of define who your character is. And they're interesting ways in the same way trouble gets you into some, trouble. Instincts can get you into some trouble as well because if
I like the idea of like a hedge mage with some that just seem like ridiculous, but really they make sense. Like, never drink sparrow blood under the second full moon of the summer solstice. And you're like, what? Why is that even
that's
relevant?
Obviously
trust me. Trust me, it's important.
That's too oddly specific. But like if one of your beliefs is always draw your sword at the first sign of danger, right? If you're in the presence of a king or someone important and someone startles you and you draw your sword, well, very clearly there could be trouble that comes from this, right? But they're things that are always true or never true.
And they're also going to be frequently relevant to the story. So like we talked about with the flaws, if it's never going to come up, then it should be on your character sheet. Like these are things to pull you into the game and make you more interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a way to cue your GM to say, these are things that I am interested in exploring. And that's part of our GM discussion that we're going to have later. But these are things that if you're going to do this, you should point these out to your game master, or if you are a game master,
and maybe more than once, because keeping track of like 5 people is difficult sometimes.
Well, yeah, and that is true because it's on you as a player to engage these things and to make them happen when they should be happening, even if your GM doesn't necessarily realize it, right?
And even when, and especially if it's going to be towards your detriment.
Yeah. So, with those couple things right there, the high concept in trouble, the ways to connect your characters around the table together, a belief, an instinct, those things right there, without even having played, you almost have a fully flushed personality laid out right in front of you.
I'd like to come back to the life, what is it called? Life story?
Life path?
Life path, that's it. Because one of the things that I talked about was when you're just putting dots on the character sheet for skills that are going to give you the most bonus to do things. So that was one of the cool things about life paths is it comes with a built-in reason why these exist.
Yeah, you have like a skill package you get for each life path.
Right, so you're like, I'm a sailor, so I know how to tie knots knots and use rope. I have some nautical sense, that sort
Right.
of thing. And so, Burning Wheel's always been incredibly crunchy for me because you have to pick all of those and break it down into so many years and then go through all the skills.
Right.
But there's no reason why you couldn't think about what kind of character you are and then have that inform the skills. Or if you want to min-max it, cool. But come up with a cool backstory as to why
Right.
you have 15 points and use rope. Like, were you Houdini before this?
If your
or
vision
like...
of min-maxing a game is 15 ranks and use rope, I want to see how you lasso the world into your into submission.
It's going to be relevant, I'm telling you.
Right.
I'm making Wonder Woman.
Right on. Well, those are my three big highlight games in my mind. So Fate, Burning Wheel, and PBTA. With those three things that you have there are great tools to draw from very easily, not even changing the game mechanically in any way, that you can use to sort of shape your game. And the more work you do at the beginning of a game as a player for building your character with hooks and things for the GM to grab into, the more it will pay off down the road. Because everyone talks about the game, it really doesn't get running until about session 4 or session 5, right? But if you have built these things into the game initially into your character, you can get a much fuller story going by game 2 and game 3 instead of looking at 5 and 6 now, right?
And I would add, like, don't be afraid to annoy your GM a little bit at session 0 by asking lots of questions. So you're like, okay, we show up and we're in this tavern. Well, where are we?
Right.
What kind of climate is it here? Do I know anybody here? Have I been here before? Or you could even say, hey, I think my character has been here before. Is it okay if I know this person in the town? And that gives them an NPC whose name they didn't have to come up with or profession they didn't have to come up with. And it automatically involves you in the world. And if it's just a layover town, it's okay if that's not a thing. But it basically just comes back. You don't have to put it all on the GM. Like, you get in there, be like, I want to be involved in this world so that there's some reason for you to pull me along.
Right. So some of this advice that we're talking about, while it's for players, it's also for the GM to sort of loosen the reins a little bit. If you're one of those GMs that really likes to have your hands around everything, well, it's more fun, I think, in my opinion, as a GM to sort of play fast and loose. And I know it's hard for people to wrap their head around doing that. And I think it gets easier with experience as you've been doing things and seeing things.
When you put it that way, it sounds dangerous. What I like to say is that as a GM, I am incredibly lazy. So if I can take an opportunity to make you tell me an NPC's backstory and make you give me a name for them and create a reason why they're here, that's perfect. I would like more of that to happen.
My only point is that you have to... While running a game is more work than anything than on the GM than the players, right? I think that's always going to be true. However, that doesn't mean that you have to take all of the responsibility on yourself, and you can relax a little bit and give your players some agency and let them tell you some things about what they want to see in the game. Because if they're telling you, that's because they want to see that there, right? They're not telling you things that they don't want to see in the game.
Right.
You don't do that. You just don't say things that you don't want to see. Is there a bowling alley in this town? Well, they clearly just want to go bowling. They don't ask for the bowling alley if they don't want to go there, right? There's no reason for that. So,
hey, is there a shop? No, I don't want to buy anything.
Right.
I'm just curious.
I was just seeing if there's a shop here because, I just like to look at signs. So, but it's a way for you as a GM to sort of play a little bit too, right? Is to relax and let them surprise you a little bit and see what creativity you can draw out of them by giving them that agency. The other part of it is, as the GM, you can just ask them questions, because I do it all the time, because sometimes I'm like, I'm not sure what I want to do here, so I just ask, what do you think is what is the thing that you would expect to see here, or whatever that is, right? Or on the other side of it, if you are the character playing in the game, if you're a rogue, it stands to reason that you have fundamental rogue knowledge, right? You could just say, hey, do I know of any sort of illicit merchants here, or any thieves guilds that exist here, or people that may have been in trouble with the law in some kind of a corruption way or something here, or if you're the fighter, are there adventuring parties here? Are there, big contracts for bodyguard work here? And that comes along with a whole other slew of baggage. Are they bodyguards for unscrupulous nobles? What is, anything. The list of questions is endless, but it's reasonable to say as a player, hey, I'm a rogue. I should have rogue knowledge. This is what I do. If you're a mechanic, you probably know all the shops in town. This one sucks. These ones do good work. This place is the cheapest, whatever it is. It's because that's the world you live in, right? So you should have that relevant knowledge without having to make a skill check.
The wises are another cool thing that Burning Wheel does. That's basically kind of what you're talking about there. It's literally an infinite number of, and you see those also in One Ring with your lores, herb lore,
right?
Whatever.
I like this. The circle ideas is interesting in Burning Wheel as well, where instead of having contacts and that kind of stuff, you have a circle of people. So if you are a rogue, you just have a you are in the circle of rogues. So you may just know, hey, do you know, Pickpocket Dave? Oh, I think I do. I'm a, and you don't need any kind of mechanical thing to codify that. But I think as long as you don't push it too far and try and get too much out of it, that as a game master, I'd be like, yeah, sure. That kind of stuff. That sounds good to me.
That's encompassed in the rapport skill in Fate as well.
All right. So is there any other specific things in other games you think to draw on that might be incorporated into other fantasy games that aren't necessarily mechanical?
Well, there is another thing that's not necessarily mechanical that I wanted to mention, but I haven't seen a game where it's done well.
Challenge accepted. So what is it?
Gods.
Oh,
who you worship.
Yeah.
There's paladins. There's all kinds of them out there, but I don't see any of them stopping during game to pray to anybody. Like, I don't know whose word the clerics are spreading, but
right.
Like,
yeah.
I don't know. I don't even know what doing it well would look like, but it's not there right now.
No, you're 100% right. And even in a lot of
it's another thing about, like I said, dots on a paper. Like if it's on your character sheet, it ought to be important.
Right.
So if you wrote this god's name on your character sheet, why aren't we talking about it?
Well, and it should be more than just I pray 8 hours a day to get my spells back. Involve feast days and holidays for your character. For the
we talked about it a little bit with magic too. It's like, if there's a god and they're giving you special powers, guess what? You're sitting on a special mission there, Job.
Right?
Like,
yeah.
God's gonna come shit on you, my friend.
One of the problems that I have with a lot of the fantasy deity stuff is even in worlds that are more developed and explored, the way that they present the material for the faiths is sort of bland and flat. It's more mythology as opposed to practical stuff that's happening in a day-to-day faithful person's life.
Everything I even read was like, basically you get the simple player's book and then you are like, okay, I'm playing a cleric, so I gotta have a god. And then you read through the 3 to 4 sentences of each god.
Right.
And that is quite literally the only contact I have with them for the rest of the entire game. And I don't even read anything else about them.
There are some other setting books that explore it a little bit deeper.
But as a player, I don't care.
Oh, well, yeah. Well,
I'm not going to buy that setting book for your game. I'm just not. If you have it, I might read it.
Okay, but I think this is something I would put back on the players is that if I'm running this game in Faerun or wherever it is, right, and you're playing a cleric, I'm going to tell you to read this. It's probably not a huge thing. It's probably a page or something, right, of sort of who the god is and what they are about and what they do. And I'm going to tell you to do that because that's got to be part of your character and what you're doing if you're playing a cleric. Otherwise, why are you playing cleric?
That's true. It's on the player.
Suck that up, dude.
I should read that part.
I'm sorry. You've got to. But that said, most of the setting books, their section on the god is very flat. It's not day-to-day faith stuff of what it is to be this kind of a priest of Ilmad or Helm or Torm or whoever. It's very flat and not.
I say that I haven't seen gods done very well, and that's true. But pointing back at Vampire again, the way that they did the roads and broke down what the different sins are based on your ranking on the road and and the interest that they put actually into the description of each one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not heavy reading. They're 2-3 pages, maybe 4 at the most. But they were interesting to read, and they provided some good flavor and depth and ways to actually incorporate that into how you were playing your character. And while that's not quite religion, it's about as close as vampire gets.
Pretty good. It's pretty similar. It's like a code of ethics. So
Right.
So I think there's definitely some things to draw from there. So maybe there should be like a hierarchy of sins for your clerics or whatever, right? That should be directly related to their faith and what their God is all about. So that could be a cool thing for if you want to take that on yourself as a player, to sort of draw up this list of like, from 1 to 10, hierarchy of sins, and maybe as you go up in level, the demands that are placed on you are more, right?
Yeah, or at least bare minimum, write 2 or 3 things that are a hard no for your character on your character sheet, or like your instincts, basically. Like, I will always help somebody in need. I will never do this, and hold yourself accountable to those, because it's easy to say like, okay, I'm a good person. This is the list of things.
Right.
But when you write a hard stop on there, then when you come to that exact problem, because it's gonna happen. Right. Then you're going to have that kind of moral faith dilemma.
Those instincts and beliefs are really easy to write when you sort of create a religious character, whether that's a cleric or a paladin or something along those lines, where it gets a little more difficult because it's a little more personal than is in the other style characters. Because if some divine being is granting you powers, they clearly are a huge portion of your life, right? So it makes writing those a lot easier. It's just harder to do it sometimes when you do them for non-magical characters, essentially. But what I will say is it makes a much fuller character. It makes a more tangible personality.
Yeah. And I guess probably that's why it's not brought in as much either, because at no point have I ever seen somebody be like, okay, well, you've met the standard now. You've committed this many sins. We're going to go ahead and excommunicate you from the order.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry about your luck.
Right.
Probably should have been a better monk. So when there's no consequences, there's not much incentive either. Okay, first, I'm not advocating for in any fashion for more classes, because I am like minimum crunch. If you can achieve it with some kind of narrative blurb that takes 2 to 3 seconds, there's absolutely no reason to create more pages for me to read. But when we talked about NPC creatures, we talked about how there's a limited number that get used. And we see those rehashed again and again and again, and that's part of why the fantasy gaming feels so flat. And I think probably the same statement could be said about player characters as well. So in LOTFP, there's a very finite number of different classes that you can play.
And out of the core book, there is fighter, specialist, cleric, magic user, and then halfling, elf, dwarf. So there are 8 or 7, I can't count. And if you don't have non-humans in your game, then there's really only 4. And then if you don't have magic in your game, there's really only 2. So
super, super simplified. And in D&D, you have a few more than that. And
roughly
as
10.
the editions go on, you get more.
More.
And Pathfinder works much the same way. But the majority of people at your table seem to be playing humans, elves, half-elves, or dwarves.
Right.
And I don't know that's wrong. I don't know. We've had some like halflings or gnomes, whichever system you're using, whichever the equivalent is. But
most of those games don't use race as a class. They use race as a overlay that goes on top of your class. So OSR stuff.
Sorry, you asked about classes. I was talking about
is a different. It's an important distinction to make, because they do make race into class there, and I think it's an interesting way to look at it. It sort of part of this is going to be a whole nother thing about race as class, which could be an interesting conversation to have, because I think it's kind of a neat way to look at it. But so I will admit, adding some of the extra classes out of some of the Splat books can be kind of neat and interesting and whatnot, and they can add a different flair to the game. My only problem with it is that with a lot of those, like when 3rd edition was doing it, it was every new book that came out had to be a little bit better than the one before it. So then it got to the point where it felt like, well, there's no reason to...
It's more complicated.
Well, but more powerful, mechanically more powerful. So then it was sort of like, well, why do I want to play the fighter when I can just play this swashbuckler class that does all the fighter stuff, but it does this and this and this too?
Right.
So while I do think that adding more classes, more choices for classes can add something to the game and you can make more interesting characters that way, I do think at a certain point, though, it starts to lose something because now you're invalidating other classes, which kind of goes back to my point about not playing 3 wizards and 2 fighters in a party, right? You want to be the thing that you are special. So if your class totally invalidates another person's character, well, don't be that guy. That sucks, because now that other character is not, they don't have a role to play in the party anymore, whatever that might be.
I get what you're saying, and while I think that's probably somewhat on the player, I think that's more on the game system that is being created. Like, if you're making stuff that is broken enough that it's invalidating other people's characters because of the class they picked, then you probably did something wrong making the new class.
Well, yeah, but they still put them out.
Right, but, I mean... maybe they should fix it or stop.
But that doesn't help me at my table when some player comes to the thing with the sword and fist book that has whatever class in it or whatever the heck it is, right? That's sort of creates complicates things a little bit. So I just think that the more classes thing is an interesting way to look at it, but I don't know. Yeah, it's. You have to tread carefully with it because
there's really a lot of classes in the first one too that you don't see play, or maybe not the first one, but pre 5e that you don't see played a lot either. So, I say that maybe more classes would be interesting, but I don't know that I really mean that either because I like the simplified magic user of LOTFP as opposed to I have a druid and a wizard and a sorcerer.
Right. And a warlock now.
And a warlock. And does anybody really know how a sorcerer is not either a wizard or a druid? What is the difference? I still don't know.
It has to do with memorizing spells and spell books and whatever. But I agree.
And then there's a cleric and there's a monk, which is like a warrior cleric, which is really cool, but almost nobody ever plays one.
Well, they don't get spells, but yeah. I don't know. It is.
And why not? If the cleric has a god and gets spells, why does the monk has a god? He's worshiping all the time. Why didn't he have spells?
Like at the monastery. I agree. It's one of those things where I kind of like the simplified versions of things with a lot of the OSR stuff and LOTFP. But I have to say, the addition of Amazon and Witch in the Frostbitten and Mutilated book are both really cool. And I've got a Red and Pleasant Land game going where everyone is an Alice, which is a specific class. And it's very interesting but those ones, you roll on a percentile table to see what abilities you get when you go up a level. So while there are 3 Alices in the game, all 3 of them have drastically different abilities they have, right? So they're very, very different. But so I don't know. I think it's one of those things that you can totally do it, but you just got to sort of pay attention, and you got to pay attention to when they're not going to be first level, but when they're going to be 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th, 12th level, if the game goes on that far, for what abilities they're going to have and how it's going to change things and what you have to do, right?
Yes. I think another important thing that we haven't mentioned yet that's directly related to making sure you have diversity in character skills at the table is not creating your player character without talking to the other people at the table.
Oh, yeah.
So if we both made wizards that specialize in fireball, we probably should have had a conversation somewhere during character creation. Yeah, what are you going to make? I'm going to make a wizard. I'm going to make an elf. I'm going to make a halfling, whatever. And there should have been a conversation that happened so that there was some sort of diversity instead of just, okay, well, my fireball is going to be totally better than your fireball. So sorry about your luck.
Right. Well, do you have anything else to add to this? I mean, we talk a lot about making good characters and that kind of stuff and full party template style stuff. The only other thing I think I would mention is that everybody's aware of fantasy tropes. So if you're playing a fantasy game, lean into those, embrace that. And, if you want to be Conan and have the furry diaper and, go that route with the giant sword, then lean into that and do it. It's fantasy for a reason. I think anytime you're playing a genre style game, you should lean into those tropes if you want. If you're going to embrace a trope, then lean into it. If you're going to break that trope, then break it. Don't do something in the middle. Go one or the other, right?
Yeah. And when you're playing fantasy, I would kind of lean towards don't play it safe either, because a lot of people seem to be like, okay, well, I don't want to do this because I might fail, or, I'm not good at that particular thing. But like role playing is just like life. If you're afraid of failing, you're going to have a really boring ass time. So
right.
Get out there and try some stuff. If you're not good at doing this particular kind of challenge, figure out a way to do it a different way that you are good at, or, recruit the other people at the table to help you. That's what we're here for.
Right. And that's part of the entire OSR mentality, is sort of finding creative ways to problems, and as a GM, not letting them do that. If they find a creative solution to a problem, then great. Reward them for being creative. Reward the players for doing that. And on the flip side of that, if the GM is rewarding you for that creativity, he's telling you what he wants to see, right? In the same way, if you ask about the bowling alley, that's what you want to see. If he's rewarding you for those creative solutions, then that's what you should be doing. That's what it's all about, really,
There's a lot of negative with failure, and negative with character death, even, and negative with having flaws on your character sheet or a minus in something. And those things make your character more interesting, and they make your game more interesting.
Right.
And if the only version of failure that exists in the game is just your character is dead, that's kind of sad too. And it's one of the things I really like about Powered by the Apocalypse is failing or succeeding at a cost.
Right.
And I think that's something that could benefit. And that's more of a GM thing too. But if you're talking to your GM and maybe you're like, okay, my character could die, but wouldn't it be cool if this happened, or something like that? Like, don't be afraid to make suggestions that are still horrendously bad for your character, that are just shy of death, because they can lead to really interesting role playing and really interesting story. And really, at the end of the day, like, a cool experience is what we're really here for.
Right.
So.
Right on. I agree.
It's my 2 cents.
Well, I know.
Suck more at your table. That's really what I'm saying.
I know we spent a lot of time talking about making cool characters and stuff, but I just thought we had talked a lot about the game master side of things and hadn't really addressed it from a player side. And also really wanted to mention a lot of the Burning Wheel and Fate stuff and how they kind of put things together, because those are great ways to incorporate into any game that you have at your table that can improve the characters that are there without changing anything mechanically. So you don't have to worry about any kind of balance issues or anything. These are all just sort of stylistic choices and cool background bits of information for your character to sort of flush them out and make a more tangible person instead of just numbers on a sheet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right on. Well, we thought we would also the next one in our fantasy series that we're going to do is making NPCs and villains. And we thought it was relevant to mention all of this stuff about characters too, because all of the things that we have just talked about, you can also use when creating NPCs and villains for your game. Quick Gonna Geek promo for On the Bubble podcast. Why were they canceled? And canceled sci-fi TV author John J. Joex, episode 34. Author John J. Joex shares his expertise on North American TV ratings, plus why sci-fi and fantasy shows have always struggled with renewals. John is the author of Why Were They Canceled and Canceled Sci-Fi TV. So check them out. That's On the Bubble podcast. And you can find them on the Gonna Geek Network at gonnageek.com. So hopefully you guys got something useful out of this, and we're going to continue on with our fantasy series going into our next episode, which is going to be about making better villains and NPCs for your games. And I think that'll do it for us this week. As we mentioned last week, we will be back to our normal release schedule since the holidays are over. So normal episodes on Wednesday and Night Witches episodes every other Friday. So I think that'll do it, and we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. This has been an episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at Incompetech.com. You can support us at Patreon.com/JustOneMoreFix or follow us on Twitter at Just One More Fix.